Hi everyone, I'm Rahul Jasti. I'm here with the Objective Reporter, and I'm interviewing Luke Barber. Mr. Barber, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Luke Barber. I'm running for Missouri House of Representatives, District 89, which includes the municipalities of Chesterfield, Country Life Acres, Crystal Lake Park, De Pere, Frontenac, Huntley, Kirkwood, Ladue, and Town and Country.
Okay, great. So to start off, we're just wondering, in your opinion, how well have the leaders of St. Louis area, both city and county, handled the pandemic so far?
St. Louis is actually an interesting one in the fact that we were one of the quick ones to react to COVID-19 this year. Part of that, I believe, is part to the history of the 1918 Spanish flu, where Max Starkloff, the founder of Starkloff Disability Institute's great-grandfather, was the public health director at the time, and had to fight with the aldermen to even be able to do a public health order back in 1918. Back in 1918, they did a lot of what we now call social distancing. They closed a lot of the public places, like movie theaters, parks, and a bunch of places like that in 1918. So I think what happened was they saw that the stuff worked in 1918. The science is there, that it's worked before. So they thought, let's try that again. And so I think that historical kind of approach of let's look at what's worked and what can we reinstitute again has been one of the values that they have been doing, which is why St. Louis City and County has probably instituted their mask ordinance and social distancing mandates and stuff. I also work as an essential employee. I worked predominantly in grocery. Got a second job relatively recently as a direct support professional with a disability provider agency. And so as being a direct support professional and working in grocery, when COVID hit, a lot of the protections for workers were not there originally. They didn't even have the plexiglass barriers. They weren't even mandating masks. And then over time, they gradually sort of upped the amount of, you need to have certain things in order to operate as a business, and did kind of a scale up approach, which I think was kind of in part because they didn't want to scare people off with the virus if they thought it wasn't, to kind of see where kind of the direction it was going to go, whether it was going to fizzle out and be like kind of the flu or be as bad as it is currently.
All right, that's very interesting. I didn't actually know much of that history. So if you were to take office this November, which I'm assuming is the plan, what policies could you implement in order to help your constituents in the aftermath of the pandemic, assuming it dies down somewhat?
A lot of the stuff that I'm trying to figure out is a lot of workforce development issues. We're seeing this attack currently on Medicaid in the state of Missouri. And Medicaid expansion is coming to the ballot box on August 4th. Medicaid pays a lot for job coaching and job coaching supports for the disabled. But we also have this thing called the WOIA, or the Workforce Opportunity Innovation Act, which is a federal law that our state is not taking advantage of. And it provides a lot of workforce training and revitalization kind of efforts so that those that are unemployed, their company has left the industry, can find jobs in either the same industry or with another company, or can be retrained to be suited to a different industry in its entirety. and a lot of disability laws are really lacking in the state of Missouri. Currently, disability law allows a lot of sub-minimum wage of the disabled under 14C waivers, in which workers with disabilities can be paid as low as 60 cents an hour through sheltered workshops. That's what Goodwill and some of those groups have gotten in trouble for over the years. And we as a state can actually work on minimum wage and eradicating the low, because if you get more people working and they're paying into the tax system, we can actually generate more revenue for our state. We've got this backwards budget kind of thing right now in the state of Missouri, where they think, oh, we got no money coming in, so let's cut everything. When in reality, rather than cutting everything, if we just found a way to increase the tax revenue under a tax fairly kind of system, in which the big corporations and the 1% pay their fair share of taxes, we could actually expand services and actually increase the budget many folds, and be able to repair all the crumbling infrastructure, the roads, be able to provide good public transportation, be able to make more of the issues that middle-class Americans are facing. Because what we've seen over the years is this tax burden has shifted from sort of the wealthy corporations and the 1% onto the middle class, which has therefore sort of made it so that not only are the companies that have done zero tax liability not paid taxes, but they're also some of the ones that are the highest ones on government assistance. So they're doing a double whammy. They're not paying into the system, but they're also causing a lot of revenue to be spent, which frankly is part of the cause of our low state budget that I'm seeing, where we can kind of flip stuff and say, why isn't the system working? Why is the systemic structures in place not working? And it's not working because everyone has a backwards philosophy of, let's create the legislation and worry about the impacts of it later, when we should be focusing on what's the impact of the legislation first, or how is this going to impact other budget numbers or other pieces of legislation in the long run. And so we need to focus on the impacts rather than the and this bill is going to impact the constituents in X way, because different bills are going to impact people in different ways. And trying to look at sort of the holistic approach when it comes to legislation, because right now we're seeing this very much, one side gets everything they want, the other side gets nothing of what they want, and because there's limited testimony on public bills and stuff, people are just slamming all these riders and amendments onto bills that are then getting passed sort of under the cover. Whereas if we knew everything that's in a bill, got it back to the bare bones legislation, frankly, I don't think we'd see all the problems we're seeing we are in Jeff City.
All right. Thank you for that. And yeah, talking about changing systems, recently there have been a lot of calls to defund the police, mainly in places like Minneapolis and New York City. If you could just explain some of your thoughts on this measure and whether you think any other changes should be made to law enforcement, specifically in St. Louis.
I think that the areas of law enforcement that are really the problem are in terms of this overuse of militarization by police. I don't think it's necessarily the police officer's fault, but I think that the problem is that we have have pushed the use of tear gas, the use of rubber bullets, the use of these militarization tactics on police. And so I don't want to say that we should defund the police entirely, because defunding the police entirety, if you look at the words defund the police, that typically means $0 and 0 cents. So defunding the police in its entirety is not exactly what they're trying to get at. But what I think what they're trying to get at is this idea of, let's lower the revenue, still have some police, because we know we're going to need some police to enforce the laws. But what can we do to get rid of the bad ones and also lower the use of force unnecessarily? And another group that is targeted heavily by police besides African Americans are those with mental health and mental illness. Those are the two biggest groups in the prison population right now, are the African American group and those with the mental health. So one of the changes that I would propose, for an additional change that I would propose to law enforcement, is better cultural sensitivity training, better crisis intervention training, and FRDAT, which is First Responder Disability Awareness training, and Pathways to Justice, which is a newer training done by the ARC of the United States, which is a disability group, in collaboration with DOJ, or Department of Justice. And the problem we're seeing is police may have taken the CIT training once in the academy, but they're not required to do follow-up or refresher trainings. So they may be able to say, oh, I've done a training once, but you get in the field 20 years down the line, you're going to forget what you learned on day one. So it's not enough to say that they should have these trainings, but that they should have continual refresher courses, because like those that know CPR are required to retrain CPR every 2 years. Those that are in that do certain trainings have to be done over and over and over again, because the information changes. It gets outdated, it changes. And if no one has the current best practices and the current ways that things are supposed to be done, you're going to have people that do the current way, but also do the old school methods that have become outdated.
Yeah, thank you. So moving on, as a person who has been diagnosed with autism, what are some of the greatest challenges you've faced thus far, both as a citizen and as a political candidate?
The more of the challenges I've faced have been more from the private citizen standpoint. I've faced a lot of discrimination in terms of disability, particularly in higher ed. I was mainstream most through K-12, had supports and stuff through high school. But once you hit 18 in high school, they're sort of like, we're done with the supports. You've got to find them on your own now. And so you get to these college settings, and the colleges aren't prepared to really give the same accommodations that everyone's used to. And so I've had professors tell me I stim, I fidget a little bit. And so like I'll subconsciously will like click a pen. I had a professor tell me if I couldn't bring a stick pen, one of those like Bic pens that you see at like hotels and things, to not even show up to class. I've also had, have gone to the St. Louis Community College Board of Trustees meeting. They were trying to do this stupid policy that limited free speech through the wazoo, had like a 2-minute no exceptions policy, which is actually in direct violation of the ADA under the reasonable accommodations requirement, because extended time is one of the common accommodations for people with disabilities. And so that policy ended up getting invalidated because they didn't have that policy. And then we're seeing also in higher ed that schools are, when students have mental health issues, that they take it through the disciplinary side instead of the care and concern method. Instead of referring out to help and treatment, they're just kicking the students out of school, saying, go somewhere else. And so those are sort of three big examples that I faced as a private citizen. As a political candidate, I haven't faced as much, only because we haven't been able to do as much this cycle as well. With the COVID stuff, we're unable to really knock doors. We're unable to really hold events. And then the other big thing that I've sort of really seen as a person with disability is this lack of understanding of what it means to have a disability, and the systemic version of low expectations. People always focus on the dis portion of disability and not so much the ability portion, because they always think of oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, when they really should be looking at what can you do, what are you able to do. And so that's quite a the big stuff.
Yeah. So one of our goals at the Objective Reporter is to inform the newest generation of voters, the younger generations that currently are a lot less politically active and politically informed than others. Knowing this, what advice would you give them going forward?
The advice that I would give them is to be educated on the candidates, to do your research, because a lot of times people just vote for the incumbent just because they're the incumbent. And I would also say that people don't realize the strength in numbers that the younger generation actually has, because if the younger generations that technically are becoming more of the population these days, if the younger group would turn out and actually turn out in mass and be educated on the politicians, their numbers are actually big enough that they can actually sway an election, and actually impact the outcome of an election. And there's another critical kind of disability piece that we're seeing too. We're also seeing a lot of restraint and seclusion in K-12 schools, where they use, which is really a barbaric practice, where they use a lot of these basket holds and other holds on an individual that really aren't really supposed to be used. And I know in the past couple of years, there's been legislation against restraint and seclusion, which is also looks very similar to like the padded rooms in the mental hospitals as well. But we're finding these in school buildings and community buildings and places that they're not really supposed to be. And so you're seeing almost this solitary confinement method used on the disabled. We're seeing these holds used on the disabled. And we're not really seeing the understanding, oh, this person has a mental illness, or this person has a certain diagnosis. What can we do to support them? What can we do from a preventative angle? What can we do to accommodate and mitigate the risks so that they don't have the mental health crisis in the first place?
All right, thank you. And again, thank you for speaking with us. We learned a lot about you. And again, good luck with your coming elections. If you have any other questions, please reach out, and might reach out again, maybe before November.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thank you too.